I want to touch on Frank Lampard at Everton because the start of the season has been a bit mixed. Like they've been competitive most of the games. They've managed to dig out draws each time. And it just something felt a bit different about that win against West Ham because like West Ham were brutal. It was somehow only the second worst Premier League game of the weekend after the Southampton and Villa game on Friday night. But I know West Ham were really poor, but Everton dug out that win. Is Frank Lampard building something there? Because he's such an easy target and an easy scapegoat, particularly not just from people on Twitter, but well-respected journalists as well. So what are your thoughts on maybe Frank Lampard at Everton and if it's going to work, and maybe some of the reaction as well? As I mentioned, Twitter and throughout journalist worlds as well.
Yeah, well, he's not everyone's biggest fan, and probably he mightn't have helped himself at different stages over the years. I know there's always a bit of to and fro with West Ham fans, especially considering how his dad was a legend there and how Frank left West Ham when he was younger. But I think if you were to tell Frank Lampard as soon as they stayed up last year that they would lose their best player in Richarlison, I think the panic signs would have been pretty alarming, not just with him, but with the board as well. But they do seem to have been very clever with their summer signings. And players that kind of fit the Everton mould. You look at someone like James Tarkowski, and he's a really strong, bullish centre-half. I think it's somewhere like Everton, you've seen a couple of times where he's put in big challenges and he's got the Goodison crowd going. And similar with Conor Cody, that was a signing that was a little bit interesting considering Cody's reputation coming through the Liverpool academy, being a Liverpool fan. But that partnership seems to be working. And he settled across a very settled back four. That was until the other night when Nathan Patterson came off injured in the first half of Scotland's games. I'm sure Frank Lampard will be praying that isn't too bad an injury. Obviously, he's got Seamus Coleman who can slot in there, and it might suit Seamus Coleman having a lot more settled the back four. And then obviously one of their marquee signings is Onana in midfield, who, you know, from one of the first games I watched him play, I think it might have been at Ellen Road. The guy just looks outstanding, looks a really traditional tall central midfielder that can get around the pitch. And then obviously you've got Alex Iwobi who's finding lots of form. You've got Idris Gana Gueye, who's again another kind of popular, very clever sign and very popular with the Everton fans. Had a bit of a run around Ronald Koeman before he left. And then the one area you had to replace, because you can't rely on Calvert-Lewin with his fitness, was to get a centre forward. And in Neil Maupay, again, they found someone in the mould of a kind of a traditional number 9. But I think the Goodison fans will love him for his antics and his demeanour. And he's the kind of player, as Andros Townsend said during the week, that you want on your team because you know he'll wind you up if he's not. But I, in fairness to Frank, I think he settled the ship. I still think it's a long way to go in the season, but that was a big win against West Ham. And considering, you know, you got to win your home games, you got to make Goodison Park a difficult place to go, and I think they've started to do that this year. And they're unbeaten in their last few league games, and things are starting to look up for Frank Lampard. But he has to be wary because, as I said, one injury to someone like Nathan Patterson is a huge loss, and Everton just don't have the squad to cope with that, really.
Yeah, here's where I am a bit with Frank Lampard. I feel like at Chelsea, the job definitely came too soon. A bit like Carragher's famous quote, you know, I'd love Frank Lampard to get the Chelsea job in 10 years' time. It did feel like that, and it was too good an opportunity to turn down. And by and large, given that his hands were tied in that first season, it was a really successful season to get top 4. They just didn't kick on. Some of the signings didn't work out. Timo Werner, Havertz, Champions League final aside, has done very little in Chelsea jersey, both under Lampard and Tuchel. So I just felt that job came from too soon, and the abuse he got, not that it was warranted, but, you know, it was sort of similar to the Ole Gunnar Solskjaer in that it's probably not going to take this club to the next level. But I just feel at Everton it's almost gone beyond that, where people were ridiculing the way Frank came into Everton and how he's going to bring them down, and almost ridiculing the way they celebrated staying up, not just Frank but the fans themselves. Like, Everton's a massive football club, one of the best supported football clubs in England. So I feel people on the outside of Everton don't understand that, and the more you see the way Frank Lampard interacts with the fans, the way he celebrated staying up last season, the way he celebrated that victory, not too dissimilar to Jurgen Klopp in Anfield. He's definitely building something there that people outside Everton might not realise. And for someone like Frank Lampard, I think Everton is this type of football club where you could see him resurrecting his managerial career, because if you take the Chelsea job aside and he went from Derby to Everton, people would be getting quite excited about Frank Lampard as a football manager. But I just think maybe the Chelsea job and the way that ended in that 6 months at the start of the season, in which Chelsea ultimately ended up winning the Champions League, kind of damaged his reputation there. But Everton could be the club that potentially salvages that.
Yeah, and there is an expression, I can't remember who said it, but I think, it's kind of said, managers, that you're not a manager until you've been sacked once. And obviously Frank would have gone through that very public humiliation of being sacked of his dream job. And obviously he got it very quickly, got it too quickly. And if you look at him now, you think there's not too many more clubs in the Premier League that are bigger than Everton that Frank Lampard's going to manage. You never see him really going to a Manchester United or an Arsenal or Liverpool, or specifically Tottenham as well, with his kind of his reputation as a player. Maybe Man City could come calling. Obviously he had that spell, not just with Man City, but with the group that owns Man City over in Melbourne, I think it was. But it could be a case of this is as good as Frank's trying to get it for a number of years now. So he'll want to build roots there. He'll want to build something. And again, keeping someone like Anthony Gordon, you don't know how long you're going to keep him. So you got to take your chances when they come. I think there's no doubt you'd love Everton to have a push in one of the cup competitions. I think someone like Frank would be able to do that. When he was manager of Derby, he got a brilliant result in the League Cup against Manchester United.
That was at Old Trafford, wasn't it?
Yeah, Harry Wilson scored a brilliant free kick. They had a big win against Southampton then in the FA Cup away. Even you think of those knockout games against Leeds and to get to the playoff final. So there is that little bit of aura around Frank. He almost had it as a player as well. That Chelsea team would just win big games. So yeah, you'd like to see Everton kind of push on. It'd be interesting to see now whether how many minutes we'll see Seamus Coleman get during the international break. But you think with Patterson's injury that at least Coleman will get his chance back in there as captain, and how he'll work alongside Cody and Tarkowski, who've struck a really good partnership. And then even you think losing Pickford, big loss for the last game there against West Ham. Someone like Begovic comes in, and as he did against Newcastle at the end of last season when Pickford was out, just did his job and they get the 3 points. So I think with someone like Frank, he's starting to build roots slowly. You got to remember, obviously Benitez was hamstrung with the financial fair play, and I think he only brought in Townsend and Damari Gray, but this was someone who got rid of their best left back, their best full back, Everton, 3 days before they sacked the manager who wanted rid of Luca Dean. Now, granted, Luca Dean hasn't been pulling up trees at Aston Villa, but that was kind of the decision making that was going on in the background. Now it does seem to be a little bit more of a calmer, clearer picture. Their signings are making more sense, and there's an identity to that Everton team that they're able to go to the final whistle. They're not going to give in. They're not going to be a bad team to watch. And as an Evertonian, as a Toffee fan, if you're at Goodison Park, I think you're going to like watching that team play again. And sometimes as a football fan, that's all you want to see when you're at a game, is making sure that the players are giving it their all, because that can't be said for a number of the teams. And when you lose a game in a certain manner, as Everton have done over the last 2 or 3 years, it leaves sour taste. So I think the Evertonians, that feeling of celebration at the full-time whistle, and Frank doing a very deliberate walk around the pitch. I think as a football, Arsenal got given out at one of the games at the start of the season for celebrating a win, and everyone, the Everton players on Anna, took a phone and was celebrating. That's what football's about. You gotta enjoy the wins when they come, because it's as a manager, I'm sure it's a very fast-paced industry where you could be sacked in the morning very easily.
Yeah, you got to be careful in this day and age that there's a lot of people, the talk sports of this world, that are fishing and looking for that bit of bait. I just can't take anyone seriously with that celebration police. I just can't. Particularly just quickly on Arsenal, the circumstances of Arsenal finally have a young team support. It's not just beating Fulham at home, and with Everton having a team that, first of all, are in the Premier League, have gotten off to a solid start. I mentioned the draws and a massive win at home. Frank Lampard celebrating, I'm all for that. A few final points on that. Begovic playing for Everton. I think I did forget he played for Everton, because when I heard Pickford was injured, I was like, who's the number 2 at Everton? It's just one of those. I know he came at the start. I think it was last summer. Luca Dean, do you know how much his transfer fee was?
I know he wears number 27. I think it was around 27 million.
Yeah, up to 25 million it says here, which like you said, like at the time was a terrible deal for Everton. But
look, if you look at that, Dan, Everton have brought in 2 really young fullbacks as a result, Mikalenko and Nathan Patterson, and both flavour of the month at the minute with Evertonians. They've been outstanding, and obviously a huge shame Patterson's injured.
Yeah, and with Patterson, it's not just how good he's been; it's just they really needed someone with Coleman there, and I did when I saw Frank Lampard with Coleman at the end of last summer. I just thought of Pep Guardiola and Sergio Aguero on that. We cannot replace something, and then obviously delighted he's gone. I know Coleman's not gone yet, but it does feel his time is numbered at Everton, though. Although I definitely can see someone like Frank keeping him around. And the final thing,
it's interesting to mention that, Dan. Obviously, West Ham today have just announced that in January, Mark Noble's going to become their sporting director or technical director, and obviously that's a kind of from the outside looking in, it looks a bit of a job for the boys. Someone said on Twitter, like, what to describe your qualifications for the role, and it just says Mr. West Ham. But then I read on Twitter that he's been doing kind of sports management courses in the background and things. So that is one of them. It's either going to go one or two ways, and I think with someone like Coleman, it'd be interesting when it comes to the end of his career, what happens. Obviously, from an outside looking in, the most natural thing for Seamus Coleman to do would be to join his former Everton teammate Phil Neville at Inter Miami, because I don't think he's going to get another Premier League club, and I'm not sure he'll want to play in the Championship. So it's going to be one of them. But I thought the Mark Noble, as soon as I saw Mark Noble, I immediately thought of what Everton are going to do with Seamus Coleman.
Yeah, well, and I thought the same, and then I saw the tweet and I laughed. But yeah, look, no one was questioning Mikel Arteta's qualifications, when he did his coaching badges at Arsenal and then went on to City. I guess that's a little bit different because he's in the background, and Mark Noble's gone straight into sporting director. But if he has been doing his badges, good luck, or not badges, but whatever, the sports management courses, good luck to him. The final thing on Frank, I was sitting watching Sky Sports News. It must have been just before transfer deadline day, so 3 or 4 weeks ago. I think Gordon had just scored away from home, and he did an interview about telling Anthony Gordon that when I was a player, and when I was at West Ham, I was getting all these offers and I concentrated on my football. And the reporter was like, well, you ended up leaving. And Frank goes, yeah, well, I did 3 years at West Ham. Gordon's only done 1. So plenty way to go. It just seems like he's a little bit more comfortable in his own skin at Everton. And like I said, I do want to mention, because I touched on it at the start, that he's getting a lot of abuse. He still is, and people saying he's limited and all this. So I'm fascinated to see him at Everton, because I do think there could be a match in heaven, given the new stadium is coming next season. I saw a few overhead shots of it, and Everton fans are quite excited about it. I thought there'd be a little bit of apprehension of leaving Goodison Park, but I just think we were at Goodison Park, like, the atmosphere was honestly one of the best atmospheres I'd experienced at the sporting ground, but the facilities definitely needed upgrading there. So I think Everton fans are excited by the new stadium, and under Frank Lampard they see some sort of a team for future, and everyone's been brought up on how Everton play, which is why ultimately a lot of the flary managers like Roberto Martinez, maybe Marco Silva, didn't quite work. So yeah, exciting times there perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think you're right about the new stadium. I'm not sure whether it would come in next year or what the plan is. I think it might end up being like the Tottenham Stadium, where it's mid-season.
Or Craven Cottage. The Craven Cottage doesn't get talked about enough. That stand was meant to be done. I've been on to Connor Daly about that.
Yeah, and no, there's no doubt that Everton are kind of building something there. But like I said, for someone like Everton, the key is you want to see your own, as an Evertonian, I imagine the key is to see your own scout players, lads from Liverpool coming on, from the city of Liverpool, playing for your club. So Anthony Gordon's a prime example, because it's been a few years since they produced one of their own. Obviously they produced the likes of Jack Rodwell, Dan Gosling, produced a lot of kind of nearly men, but I think that's Andy Gordon's the first step in a very important line, because they've got some good young players, a couple of good strikers. One, Simmons, is on loan at Sunderland. So that'll be the next stage, and be interesting to see how Frank works with that, because he has a pretty good record with young players from his time management so far.
Yeah, for sure. And Everton's new stadium, this is the penultimate season at Goodison Park. We started 24-25 season, so watch the space, and also let's hope Craven Cottage gets done soon.